told you leading up to planting season how Nebraska Soybean Board funded research showed soybean planting dates had an important relationship to yield. The latest USDA crop progress report shows Nebraska's soybean farmers have made quick work putting their soybeans in the ground with 88% completion, 12 points ahead of the state's 5-year average and second in pace only behind Louisiana. This week's warm weather will likely make the latest emerged numbers obsolete in both soybeans and corn by Monday's report. With most of the plants now out of the ground, we talked with UNL Extension entomologist Bob Wright on campus earlier this week to see how growers can scout for bean leaf beetle and common stalk borer. We started by asking why common stalk borer is an issue at this point in the growing season.
It has to do with the life cycle of the insect. They have one generation a year. The eggs are laid in the fall and they hatch out in the spring, and typically they start growing, the caterpillars start feeding in brome grass or other small stemmed weeds, and they get to a point where they can't grow any further inside the brome grass stem, and so they start migrating to look for something else. And if you have corn or other field crops next to the brome grass waterway or a brome grass area where they overwintered, they start moving into corn at this time.
What happens when they move into that corn? How does it affect the plant?
Okay, they can either tunnel down into the whorl, and sometimes they kill the growing point, or they can just bore through the side of the stem of the stalk and kill the whole plant. So that's what you look for, is initially damage to the whorl leaves as they emerge, or maybe a dead whorl from where the caterpillar bored down into the whorl and killed the growing point, or dead plants, and you can see where a caterpillar bored into the side of the stem.
And how does a farmer decide if he or she should treat for this?
Okay, we have thresholds, and we'll have an article in the next issue of Crop Watch, but it varies with the crop value and insecticide costs, but and crop growth stage, but about 5% of the plants damaged is a rough threshold in corn, that if you have that many you need to treat. And if they are restricted to the field border, you can maybe get away with just treating the field border where they're heaviest and save some money that way.
Can these impact soybeans at all?
They will feed on soybeans, but they're not as important on soybeans as they are in corn. It has a very broad host range, so you can also find them in your garden on tomatoes and peppers and potatoes as well.
Let's talk about bean leaf beetle. What soybean fields would be susceptible to this pest?
Yeah, typically early planted fields, or maybe fields next to alfalfa are the ones that are most at risk. The bean leaf beetles emerge pretty early before soybeans do, and they'll start feeding on alfalfa or other legumes first, and then as soon as the soybeans emerge, they'll start migrating in there. Another thing to watch for is if you have alfalfa and soybeans nearby, after the first cutting of alfalfa, they may leave the alfalfa and move into soybeans.
And what can they do to the soybean?
Well, they are leaf feeders. They can heavily defoliate the plants if they're abundant enough. You need to have about on an average, field average of 2 bean leaf beetles per plant probably to be treatable at this time of year.
Has Nebraska been doing a good job of keeping an eye on these, or at least have they been minimized as a problem in fields?
Well, a couple of things. The hard winter we had, especially in the northern half of the state, probably reduced their numbers. And then the neonicotinoid seed treatments we have now on soybeans and corn are used very broadly. They're systemic within the plant, so they're also suppressing the adult bean leaf beetles when they feed on the plants.
What's the difference in damage above the ground and below the ground? Can the larvae also cause damage below the ground?
Yeah, the larvae there's not as much work done on them, but they do feed on the nodules. Nobody's been able to document much of an economic loss from the larval feeding. But we think it's mostly adult feeding that we need to be concerned about.
As Bob mentioned, you can check the Crop Watch website for common stalk borer treatment options. We'll link to that information on the Mercury Journal homepage when it becomes available.